housing programs that provide almost 51 units of housing to homeless families. Melissa has been working for Rochester Public Schools in the capacity of Students and Transition Coordinator since 2011. She worked closely with youth and families experiencing homelessness and works to remove barriers to school attendance for students. In addition, Melissa is the board president for Family Promises. So please welcome Nancy and Melissa.
All right.
Hi. Can you hear me okay? Is the volume okay for everyone? I'll try to speak up. I'm kind of a soft-spoken girl, and I have like one of those nasally voices that is very memorable. So I'll do my best to speak as loudly as I can. Nancy, you have any words of greeting?
No, just welcome everyone, and it's nice to see so many familiar faces from last week. And Melissa's going to start out and maybe do a lot of the talking, and I'm going to just jump in a little bit as we go along if necessary, and probably we'll be able to answer some questions.
So I do a lot of time public speaking and speaking to different crowds, and what I find myself doing a lot of times is helping people to reset their idea of what homelessness looks like, particularly homelessness in Minnesota. So I start out with some really basic questions, and I ask people to right away jump to whatever stereotype they might have. And I want you to go to that image that you imagine in your mind and tell me, when I ask, what does the homeless person you imagine look like? What do you guys see?
Dirty.
Dirty, okay.
Just like me.
Just like you? Okay, good. Seasoned crowd.
Unshaven.
Unshaven, so like beard, okay. So that brings up gender. What gender do we imagine?
Male.
Male, generally. What about age range? Okay, teenager, some imagine young, okay. Anyone else? Okay, middle age, sometimes we go to veteran. Anything else? Are they holding anything? Bags. What else? Signs. A bottle. Okay, alcohol, yep, a bottle. Okay, good. That's pretty typical of what I hear when I'm out and about. You know, we get a few teenager comments, but for the most part, we have this idea of a middle-aged or older, unkept male, that sort of thing. So maybe the person that you imagine looks a little like this. Okay? Or like this. Grocery bags, interacting with law enforcement. Or like this. Has a dog, unkept, a cup or something in front of them, asking for change, that sort of thing. We're going to try and today get a little better understanding of what homelessness looks like in Minnesota. And so I'm going to ask you questions and make you do some work. I'm sorry. Terrible, I know. It's totally interactive. If you need something to write on, I do have some note cards, and I saw some pencils. So if you don't have a sheet of paper or something, this is to help you guys keep track and just see how you do. Get a good idea about how you do. So, everyone need something? No? Anyone else? You can use the back of the sheet, yes.
Guys need anything?
They will be collected and graded, and it's your semester grade. So, work hard. This is it. It's all or nothing in my class. Yeah, exactly. President Lemkuhl can tell you about how many credits you'll earn for. Okay, so let's go to our first question. I do have a master's degree in literature and a master's in fine arts and creative writing, and there are random capital letters in this presentation that drive me crazy. That degree is in literature, not technology. So forgive my crazy capitalization as we go. So what is the average age of a homeless student in Minnesota? Just jot down the answer. No sharing with your neighbors. Eyes on your own paper. Everyone committed? Did you make a commitment? Okay. Anyone brave enough to share? Okay. We had 1719. Let's see. The answer is B. Yes. Actually, the average age of the homeless student in Minnesota is 7 years old. The data that I'm using tonight is from the Wilder study that was done in 2015. Wilder study is done in Minnesota. It's a comprehensive study on homelessness. It's done in Minnesota every 3 years. It's kind of the end all and be all for statistics that service organizations in the homeless field use. So yes, the answer is B, and that often surprises people. We expect the average age of a homeless student to be a little bit older, but 7 is the average in Minnesota. So approximately how many homeless people could be identified on any given night in Minnesota? So the Wilder study does an examination of all of Minnesota, and on that one night where they asked people, how many people were identified? It's a great question. The point-in-time count is actually done the last week in January. Wilder does their study in October. In October. Under some circumstances, they are a family that's living in a tent that has no other place to go. Yep. It's a pretty rigorous survey. I've done it myself with students, and I think that person would probably quickly be, given under the do not finish a survey, does not qualify. So, anyone ready to venture a guess? Okay, I heard a D, 20,000. The answer is actually C. In the 2012 Wilder study, the number of families or individuals identified as homeless was around 10,214. Actually, in the 2015 Wilder survey, that number went down by about 9%. 9,312, I think, was the number. So we're actually seeing a little improvement in homeless numbers in Minnesota in the last 3 years, which is awesome.
So I just want to interject here. I put it up on the board. So the Wilder Foundation actually then trickles the data down into different areas of the state. And southeast Minnesota, which includes Olmsted County and the southeast corner, on the night that or the day that was counted, there were 483 homeless people here in this little area. Most of those are actually in Rochester because we're the largest city, but there are some that are in Winona and Mankato and some of those other places. But just out of the just under 10,000 that were counted, almost 500 of those were here in southeast Minnesota.
What year is that?
This was done in October of 2015.
And how do they find them? Because homeless people tend to try to be invisible.
So the way that the survey is done is that there is a army of people in Minnesota who both work in the homeless world but also volunteers that volunteer to help, that go out to food shelves, emergency shelters, battered women's shelters, transitional housing. Often there are police officers who know where people are camping and sleeping in tents and under bridges, and they will help. Outreach workers who know where people are camping and sleeping in bridges will go out. That it's a day where I wish I would have looked, but there are a lot of volunteers and a lot of people who go out to actually find them. And so one of the things, to the point that she made, if you couldn't hear, that how do they actually count people, because they're so hard to find and they often like to stay invisible. That what we know is that the count is low because of that. And so there's a big effort to find as many people as we possibly can. The count itself has been going on since the early 1990s. It is one of the most comprehensive bits of information about homeless people in the country. It happens every 3 years, and so we really have the ability to look at trends and changes. And one of the really big trends and changes that has happened in Minnesota, I think we're going to talk about in a minute. I just about gave it away.
Don't
give it away. Whew, I caught myself.
Yeah. That's a great question, and we're going to address that a little bit. I operate under a law called McKinney-Vento, and McKinney-Vento was actually first came to be in 1987. It exists under the umbrella of the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, and was part of No Child Left Behind, was reauthorized in 2001. And McKinney-Vento has a little bit of a different definition than, like, say, HUD does, our HUD definition. And so many of these numbers that we're going to talk about, or this number here in particular, the focus of this number is not families who are doubled up, which is a big part of the population of homeless that we see. So families who are maybe staying with a grandmother in an assisted living even situation, or in a subsidized housing situation where they don't have any right to be there or stay there, and they're jeopardizing kind of both parties' housing. This focus is not on those families. So this estimate is generally quite low.
And if I can just pitch in with the homeless. So how do we define homeless is given to us from both the federal government and the state government. And so the federal government says that it is on the streets or in a shelter, unfit for human habitation, and recently they added in unable to stay more than 14 days. So there are a lot of people who don't fit into that definition. There's also a definition called chronic homelessness, which is 4 episodes in the last 3 years, or 1 episode continuously for 1 year. The 4 episodes in the 3 years need to equal an entire year for you to meet that definition. So if you don't meet that, so it gets really complicated. And so, you know, as we start to look back at policies and all those kind of things that start to affect homelessness, these kinds of definitions and the numbers start to really matter, because a family who is doubling up, which I can tell you because I work here in Rochester and I also work up in Duluth, where Duluth has a much, much bigger system for people who are homeless. It is much, much easier to count and find people who actually meet the definitions than it is in Rochester, because there are so many families who are having to double up because there aren't emergency shelters and there isn't enough options. There aren't enough places for them to go. So I think this 483 in southeast Minnesota, because that is also in Winona and in all the small communities, it's really hard to meet the definition to get counted in the bucket in the way that they count.
Okay? Are you guys ready for the next question? Okay, so of those 10,000 approximately, how many are children? So of those 10,000 that were identified by Wilder on that October night, how many of those were children? Anybody ready to shout it out? 3,000 I heard. D. Okay, let's look. The number is actually E. So 35% of the individuals identified on that October night were actually children. We're going to talk a little bit more about that data too.
Can I just throw in?
Yeah.
And in southeast Minnesota, I didn't put it up because I didn't want to give it away. 220 of these 483 were children. We're under the age of 18. So that's almost half. It's about 45%. So what's trending in Minnesota, which is what I didn't give away a minute ago, is that our homeless folks are children, and again, the average age is 7 years old. So our homeless families are getting younger and younger, and the homeless people in our state are getting younger and younger and younger. And so it goes back to that image of those older men. They are there too. We do have those folks who are homeless, but that is not who a very, very large population of our homeless folks are.
Yeah. And we have a great social service system for those adults, those single adults, the men that we might see. Not such a great social support system for our young families and young single mothers with children. Of the 10,000 that we are talking about again, what percentage of homeless are under the age of 21? So we're bumping up our statistics a little bit here. We know that 35% were children. Now if we look, so that's like 17 and younger. Now we're talking about 21 and younger. What do you guys think? Okay, I'm hearing D. You guys are getting wise to my show here. The answer is D. 46% of those 10,000 identified on that October night were under the 21 years of age or younger. So are we starting to mentally reset a little bit? We're talking about some middle-aged men, but we're talking about half of our homeless population identified on any given night being 21 years of age or younger. So if almost half of our homeless population is under the age of 21, the average age is 7, maybe our image should look more like these kiddos. They're the faces that I see and work with every day. Or this child? Or perhaps this. Middle schooler? Okay, Nancy's going to show you a little bit of a video about Center City Housing, then we're going to talk more about the kids that I see and work with on a daily basis.
You know, I'm really sick of paying all shows around here. Once you get a goddamn job,
There was a lot of chaos back then.
filthy pig.
I was still living with my mom, and she was in a domestic violence relationship. And
That was it.
It looks like it's paused.
Maybe start it over because we... Shoot.
My dear, go down to IT.
Do we want to keep moving? I can come back to it.
Yeah, we can come
Okay.
back to it.
Okay.
Yep. It'll be good whenever we get to see it.
I was supposed to get a 5-minute break. Now it's gone. Yes, ma'am.
I'll ask a question while we're waiting here.
Yeah.
I know you're going to touch on this later, but when you're working with children,
Mhm.
I don't know if you have contact with any parents,
Mhm.
they're minors, so the whole HIPAA thing is off the radar. I mean, you can just work with them and then there's no, I mean, it's not that they have to give permission.
Primarily, if the student's under the age of 17, I'm primarily working with the family, unless that minor, say for example, is living with another adult who's not the guardian. Then what we do is we work to get the student enrolled in school regardless of paperwork. That's our obligation under the law. And then we sort out, we really want kids in school for safety reasons, because if a student, say, for example, has been abducted or is with someone they're not supposed to be with, we want them in school so we know where they are during the day, and then we can sort through the paperwork once they're in a safe place. So we do, and we are held to certain requirements. We have to get releases, interagency releases, that sort of thing.
From the guardian or
Mhm.
parent.
Yeah, yeah.
And in our programming, we don't work with the child outside of the parent. So we have them both together in our housing. And so, and especially the younger the child gets, the more important it is to be engaging that parent, because you can't really be successful if you aren't also sort of bringing the parents along.
In terms of the definition of the statistics you're capturing, there's a phenomenon, I think, and I suspect it's not captured in your numbers, if that's just the people that are surfing.
Right.
Yes.
And I'm
Yeah.
assuming by what I heard you define, that they would not be in the count.
They would not be necessarily be in the wilder count, like those couch surfers, as we call them. However, in terms of the law that I operate under, the definition is families lacking fixed. There are 3 terms that we focus on: fixed, regular, and adequate housing. So that couch surfer kind of fits into that regular. It's someplace that they can't necessarily go every single night. And so the numbers that I track would count those. And I have a slide that's coming up that will show the nature of homelessness in Rochester since I've started in the position. And it will capture some of those numbers to better truly represent, I think, the kids that are in our school population.
From my awareness, that 443 number is like so grossly small.
Oh,
Yes.
very.
that I'm taken back by it, but I'm sort of trying to figure out where are the uncounted.
Right, and they're hard to find, and part of why the number can be small too is because it's really somewhat dependent on how big of a team could get amassed to go out and find folks. And so sometimes the numbers can shift because we had a ton of people mobilized and ready to go out and find people, and then other years we've not had as much luck.
And I can tell you, I participated in the Wilder study, and I did go out and interview, and we have to request a certain number of surveys, and all the surveys that we requested in the region were completed. We didn't have any, so we kind of met the capacity of number of people we were able to engage with during the course of the evening, so.
You know, I'm really sick of paying all the bills around here. Once you get a goddamn job,
There was a lot of chaos back then.
filthy pig.
I was still living with my mom, and she was in a domestic violence relationship, and I couldn't take it anymore. I had just found out I was pregnant, so I wanted to get her help, is what I initially started all this for, was to get her away from him. And then I realized she wasn't going to change. She didn't want what I wanted. To get housing, I had to go stay in a domestic violence shelter. I was really isolated. I didn't have people to turn to. When something was going wrong in my life, I was alone.
She's really representative of so many of the young families that we see across Minnesota that are homeless.
From there, I applied for Center City Supportive Housing Program.
When Randy came to us, she was really in dire straits. She birthed twins.
The first 3 months, I would say, are just a blur. I was like up that whole time or sleeping that whole time. I don't remember.
Every opportunity that we gave her, every program activity, every chance to help the boys, she took advantage of that.
So having housing, that meant I had somewhere that my kids were always at. I had somewhere to bring my kids. I had somewhere to cook for them and to take showers, give them baths, wash clothes. Little daily things like that make the biggest difference.
She wrapped her boys in the services that they needed to be able to grow healthy.
Our house actually became condemned. We ended up actually going to a motel. We desperately looked for a place and actually ran out of money, and as a desperate sort of thing, we went back to our house, and the sheriff came by and kicked us out. At that point, I was kind of at the end of my rope. I took a really big step, and I grabbed everything I owned, which was 3 bags, and started walking down the sidewalk.
So we're really seeing this generational homeless thing happening, and when you talk to people who are homeless now that are adults, most of them will tell you that they were homeless with their parents and homeless at a very early age. And so this project is really looking to interrupt that and to provide those kids with an experience of housing and an experience of change so that their trajectory changes so we aren't aging children up into homelessness.
My experience was basically desperation. One of the toughest things that I had to go through was living in a homeless shelter and trying to get through that.
We have about 400 kids in our school, and at the end of last school year, 61 of them were on the in transitions list, which means that they did not have stable housing. The kids that we work with, they're couch surfing, sleeping under bridges, sleeping in a park, sleeping in their car, and if they can stabilize that part of their life, that definitely helps them reach their goals educationally, which helps them become more productive citizens in our community.
The solution to homelessness is housing, number one. And by providing young people and families with children supportive, affordable housing, we begin to build the base and the foundation of what they need to be able to grow from there.
I found out about Center City Housing through Lifehouse, and I didn't really know too much about it, but I just thought maybe they can help me, and I started walking down there, and I put down my bags and I said, I'm homeless. What do I do? Through Center City Housing, they actually allowed me to start over and really build off of my life and really take the reins and expand.
The idea of the Empowerment Center really came together as a result of the property that we purchased to put the Gage East apartments on. Every family, every child, every youth who moves into the Gage East apartment, when they move in, will be homeless. They will be in trauma and they will be in crisis. That in and of itself creates an environment and an opportunity to really help people deal with the consequences of what crisis and trauma can do to a person and to a family. The Empowerment Center is really going to be designed to provide a set of services that meet each of the family members' needs so that they can move forward in life. We've raised all the funds to build the apartment building itself, and that at this stage we just really need to raise this small amount of money to do that rehab on the existing school so we can turn it into the Empowerment Center.
This is a very proud community, a community that knows what its potential is. One of the things that we have to do as a community together is to be able to take care of everyone, and that means everyone. And so all of those in the community who have need to find the services that can be provided to them, and that's why the Empowerment Center is important.
Everyone who partners with us will be leasing space. So the beautiful thing about that is that we won't be coming back to the community again and again for dollars into the future, that the building will be self-sustaining, the operations will be able to carry on, and that we're really coming to the community just this one time looking for funds to help do this minimal renovation.
There's a lot of great nonprofits within our community. This is a fantastic community. But the fact is, we haven't done enough for teen homelessness. It's time to do something about it.
Okay, I apologize for the pitch at the end, but I didn't know how to cut it off. So, but the reason I wanted to show that to you was to sort of give you a little picture of what it looks like or what it is like to be homeless. And every time after I show the video, I tell a little bit more of the story. So Randy, the young mom with the twins, when they ended up editing a lot of her story out, and she's given me permission to tell her story. And so what didn't get into the video is that she was addicted to oxycodone while she was pregnant. She was in her 9th month of pregnancy, and she was given oxycodone and other drugs from her mother from about the age of 14 on. And she was pregnant with the twins when she moved in with us, and she went into treatment, and then the boys were born, and they were born drug affected but not drug addicted, which was a blessing to some degree, but they both had some very serious and significant developmental delays and developmental issues. And probably the most difficult one is that they resisted sleeping. So if you can imagine being 19 years old and being addicted to drugs, and our treatment programs, are pretty good, but 18% of people who exit a treatment program a year later, only 18% of them are not using. And so she was struggling for the first quite a bit of time with her use because we don't have a magic pill. So the boys resisted sleep. So she had twins. They wouldn't sleep as they got a little bit older. They had very serious impulse control issues. They had really, really amazing and powerful gross motor skills. They could climb on anything. They destroyed every kitchen cabinet. We fixed them twice, and then we said, okay, we need to stop till they can get past this. they would get up, they needed to rock. There's a developmental thing that children need to do, and these boys needed to rock. And so they would get up because they resisted sleep. They would get up in the middle of the night. They were 18 months old. Their mom had to sleep sometimes, so she would be sleeping. The boys would get up, and they would rock. And when they would rock, the couch and the chair would hit the wall, and the neighbors thought she was beating them up or that they were beating, so we were getting a lot of complaints from the neighbors about the noise at night. They also we had to figure out a way to lock the refrigerator because they would pull everything out, and like you have to buy food. You cannot not buy food. So you have to buy it, and then you put it in the refrigerator, and they would get up, and whenever she was sleeping, whether it was day or night, they would get up and pull everything out of the refrigerator and just splatter it everywhere on every wall. They were amazing little boys. And so we did a lot of work with her, and she brought in every service that we could possibly get for those boys, so that they could get developmentally on track. And when they were 3 years old, they were scheduled to go to the Amber Wing, which is an early children's mental health program in Duluth. And so that was the plan, and we were all working towards making that happen for their 4th year instead of going to Head Start. And then magically, through all of the programs and the services and the stability of the housing and all of what was going on, they changed and got developmentally on task, and they went to Head Start. And this year, they're starting kindergarten. Randy herself, like most people who struggle with drug addiction, she was up and down and up and down and up and down. It took her a few years, as you can imagine, being 19 years old. What do you love most? Your friends. So she grew up out on the Fond du Lac Reservation, and she couldn't go there anymore because she couldn't bring the twins along. So then you can imagine what happened. All of her friends came to her. So now her housing, and then people who didn't have housing started to couch surf and sleep over. And so we just really wrapped Randy in as much as we possibly could, hoping, that if she, really understanding the circumstances that she was in, and we kept looking at ourselves and saying, how would making this particular family homeless again help in any way, shape, or form? And we had an early childhood development person on staff who said, these kids, if any one of us, if these 2 boys were placed in our home with all of our skill as parents, with all of our affluence, with all of our everything that we have, our big toolbox, we would have struggled as much as she did, because they really wouldn't sleep, and they wouldn't sit still, and they wouldn't be quiet, and they were really, really hard. But she got sober. She got a CNA certificate, so she'd been working in that, and most recently she's been working at the Dabanugan, which is the battered women's shelter for Native Americans, doing cultural programming. And so she is well on her way. I think as the boys get into school, she'll go back to college because she was a straight A student. So she was homeless with her mom. Her boys were homeless with her. She was homeless as a young adult. Our goal is to interrupt that, and so those boys don't become homeless as adults. They've had one episode. We don't count that episode. When I said 4 episodes in 3 years, that episode doesn't even get counted. We don't even look at what happened with kids. And then the other young man, Corey, who a little bit more of his story is that he was just 18 years old, and their house foreclosed, or didn't foreclose, but it was just uninhabitable, and the police came and said, you can no longer live here anymore. It is not safe. And he said they went to a hotel, and then they, just out of desperation, they went back hoping no one would notice. But of course, people notice. So then his parents said to him, we're going to go to St. Paul, and you can't come with us. We can't take care of you anymore because we can't barely take care of ourselves. And there were younger siblings. So he made his way from Barnum into Duluth. And this is really, really common for young people. Sometimes they're 15, sometimes they're 16, sometimes they're 18, but their parents say, we can't do it anymore. And so he made his way into Duluth, and at 18 years old had to go to the adult shelter, which is a really, really intense, kind of scary place. But he did it, and he's a really special young man. He actually got a full ride scholarship to St. Scholastica and is there, went to Lake Superior College for 2 years and now is finishing up at St. Scholastica. So I think, these guys can tell the story so much better than, we can give statistics and that kind of stuff, but I think you can really see it. And the age of these folks, like when I started doing this work in the late 1988s, homeless people were more that older man, and there weren't so many families and there weren't so many children, and it's a completely different picture now. Next.
And that's a perfect segue, because we're going to talk about homeless Minnesotans compared to all Minnesotans by age group. And this is a little bit of what Nancy was just saying. So this is the percentage of minors we have in Minnesota in total, 23%. But in terms of homeless minors, it's 38% of that, the total population, homeless population. Again, if you look at young adults, 5% of the total population, 8% of the homeless population. Young adults, 22 to 24, 4% of the total population, 5% of the homeless population. It starts to level out a little bit at adults and then drops at the 55 years and older stage. And again, when we talked about 46%, of the total individuals interviewed on that Wilder night, if we add and we go up to 24, we're now up to 52% of the homeless individuals identified are 24 years of age or younger. So more than half our homeless population in Minnesota. Go ahead.
And I think the significance, so to me, I immediately asked the question, well, why does it drop so much at 55? And it's because as a country, we have done a really good job at developing things for seniors. So as you get older and you're homeless, you have an option for some assisted living and some different kind of housing and supports, because we really, which is a great thing, because I'm heading in that direction too. But I just want to point out that we've really figured out how to do it for seniors, and for seniors who struggle with poverty, and for seniors who are homeless. There are places for them to go and services for them.
And we're doing a pretty good job with veterans now too, I think.
And it's getting better with veterans, yes.
Okay. So we're back to questions. You're back on the spot. Sorry. We're halfway through the test. True or false? Homeless adults are mostly male. And this is sort of a little bit of a trick question, and I love asking this question to students. But what do you guys think? Homeless adults are mostly male. So we're looking at 21 years of age and older. Okay, false is what I heard. False, it's almost equal. And then my students go, it's not almost equal, 53% are male. They fight me on it. And I'm like, well, we're going to say it's almost equal, false. But so why is it we get that image of that man, scruffy man with a beard? Why is it that that's what we imagine?
Because they're more likely to be on the street begging.
There you are right, absolutely right. It's because it's what we see. Men are more likely to stay outside and on the street. And why do women seek shelter? Safer? What else? Think of the 52%. More likely to have the children with them. Absolutely. So the families are truly our invisible population. True or false? The majority of homeless in Minnesota are from out of state. False. Yes, you guys are amazing. You got this down. So false. Yes, 77% of homeless adults have lived in Minnesota at least 2 years or have lived here at some point previously, meaning their younger years. So from that 0 to 16, they grew up here, they know Minnesota, that sort of thing, have come back or have lived in Minnesota at least 2 years. So Minnesota isn't a great place to come if you're homeless. It's cold in the winter. We all know that. We have 2 seasons, right? So 77% are actually from here in Minnesota. What percentage of homeless youth are enrolled in school? That means actually signed up to attend school. Any guess? Okay, I'm hearing a 75%. It's actually 95%. 95% of homeless youth from the Wilder study were actually enrolled in school. It means that McKinney-Vento liaisons, homeless liaisons for the school district are doing an outstanding job. Nancy, pat me on the back.
I'll pat her on the back, because what that means for those students is they're getting a meal, and they might be getting 2 meals, and it might be the only food that they get. each day. And then on Fridays, often, and some of you might participate in this, we are now in Minnesota sending children home with backpacks with food in it so they have something to eat over the weekend.
Yeah, and 69% of the students actually attended school on the day of the survey. So where we're doing a great job is identification and enrollment. We still need work on actually getting them to school every single day. But McKinney-Vento liaisons, like myself, or homeless liaisons, are a federal mandate, so we're required to have a McKinney-Vento liaison in every single public school district in the nation. It's a mandate. Many smaller schools, that person might be their principal, it might be their social worker, it might be a guidance counselor, that sort of thing. Rochester is amazing and proactive and understands the importance of the role, and it's my sole responsibility here in Rochester. What is the number one reason homeless youth report for leaving home? I heard an A, you're absolutely right. Told to leave or locked out. And all of these reasons are actually in the top 10, part of the top 10 reasons why students will choose to leave home. I work with many students who will say it's not safe for me there. Maybe mom or dad is chronic inebriate or an alcoholic, and it's just not a safe place for them to stay, and they would rather be on the street than at home. So all of these reasons are reasons why youth that I work with report for leaving.
I think, too, it's a little bit like, even as we've been getting ready to open Gage East and talking about it over the last year or so, a lot of people sort of have asked about, like, well, how will you know if the kids are just leaving home and they just don't want to be with their parents anymore, because adolescents can be dumb sometimes. And I think it's to see this statistic, to see those top 10 reasons. It isn't those kids, that isn't who we're seeing out there in the homeless population anymore. It's not the sort of the typical, I think, what we used to think of back in the day, like the runaway youth or the kid that was just mad at their parents and just wanted like a better option. We're not worried about that.
I know GLBT youth particularly at risk for homelessness because of...
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you found that to be true?
Yeah. In Rochester, it's not something that I ask youth, but statistically nationally, I think it's 25% is around where that falls. LGBTQ youth fall in terms of homelessness, and it's a huge indicator of, fighting with parents, that sort of thing, asked to leave or told to leave for that exact reason. Yep. So very sad. Yeah.
Because you said earlier you try and work with parents, especially incorporating
Mhm.
in school. When parents are in that group, are they willing to admit, look, we took this kid out? Are they still willing to work with you?
It depends. It's always a case-by-case basis. We have lots of families who are willing, like may sign, release paperwork so that we can get students enrolled, but may not necessarily care about where their student is. It's just totally a case-by-case basis.
And besides the kids, because we work with adults and all sorts of different homeless folks, one of the really important pieces that we do in all of our programming is just try to reconnect homeless individuals back to family, whether that be parents, aunts, uncles, children, grandchildren. That what happens if you become homeless, you become very, very alienated from your family and relatives. And so one of the most magical things that happens in our programming is seeing once a person comes inside and is in a stable place and has some ability to have some sanity, that ability to reconnect with family, and what that does for the homeless person and for the family is amazing. In our chronic alcoholic buildings, we have a number of folks, as you might imagine. Alcohol is very, very hard on the body. Living on the streets is very, very hard on the body. So when people move in, they have a lot of chronic conditions, and we lose people. In fact, I got an email on Monday of a man that passed away in Duluth. Almost to a family, people come back and say to us that they are so, so grateful that they knew where their family member was when they died, and that they were inside, and that they were surrounded by people who cared about them. Because for those folks, they have become so alienated from their families because their behaviors are so difficult and impossible to be around. And people, if you have I think most of us have a relative or someone that we know that struggles with alcoholism, and if you move into those chronic stages and you end up on the streets, there's not much you can do for them. And often you have to cut ties just to keep yourself, your own sanity and safety. And so being able to have that kind of connection back and understanding has been really amazing for us. We didn't expect that. So we do a lot of stuff in our programming to make that available. We have computers so people can get on Facebook. We will help people reconnect with families, come up with plans, find ways for them to call their children, because most of these folks, especially the men who have children, are very disconnected. And it's very, very healing for all family members to come back to that. And I think it'll be the same with the youth.
All right, so now I hope that we're starting to have a little shift in views, knowing what our population is and the population we're discussing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do. I've mentioned multiple times the McKinney-Vento legislation, and that's the law, the umbrella of the law that I operate under, which is part of the Every Student Succeeds Act, previously the No Child Left Behind Act. So we're law's changing a little bit, and with the reauthorization, my role is changing a little bit this year, which is exciting because I think the changes are all for the good of kids, which is my mantra for sure. But the three big terms that McKinney-Vento focuses on with students that I work with are fixed, regular, and adequate. So if I have a student, if I focus on those words and I think about fixed, what does that mean to us literally? Stable, unmovable, that sort of thing. So is a tent a fixed place to live? No. So if I have a student that's outdoors or in a tent, they're meeting that definition under fixed. It's not a fixed, stable place to stay. When we talk about regular, we mentioned the couch surfers already. So regular, by the term regular, we mean somewhere someone can go every single night. They have a legal right to be there. They're not going to be forced out of that location. So someplace they can go every single night. We have 3 shelters here in town. Do you guys know all about the 3 shelters? Okay. Dorothy Day, for those of you who don't, I'll do a quick rundown. Dorothy Day really serves 18 and over population. Single adults can stay for 14 nights and then have to be out for 30 days and cannot be there during the day from 9 to 4. It's volunteer run. Women's shelter is for women and children who are victims of domestic violence. Not for the men are not allowed to stay at the women's shelter, and I think the stay is between 30 and 45 days, but they do have some transitional housing, and it usually serves right around 30 women, but then a lot more with their transitional housing opportunities. And then the 3rd shelter here in town, Family Promise, which, full disclosure, I'm currently on the board there. Family Promise, which was formerly called Interfaith Hospitality, is a church shelter system, a church and community shelter system, where families can stay for up to 30 days. The families are given a room in a church with the blow-up bed and a chair and an alarm clock, and they go there at night, and that's where the family sleeps. The church serves the family's dinner, and then once the morning comes, they pack up and they head back to the day house. We have a house across from Yield Butcher Shop. Stop by. We've been painting. It looks great. But the day house, families will come, make calls if they need to, make sure their daycare is working okay, make sure the kids get on the bus, and then off to work or off to whatever appointments they might have. So those are the 3 shelters, and that one 30-day stay, and I think that's it. Any questions about the shelters?
The church,
Yes.
how many nights consecutive in one place?
7. Yep. families move to a new church on Sunday, and if you truly want a humbling experience, volunteer at Family Promise on a Saturday night. The feeling Sunday morning when those families have to leave is truly heartbreaking. Churches and the communities have embraced them. Yes. I'm sorry?
Where's the new church?
It's not a single church, so families move every 7 days to different churches throughout the community.
Do you stay in Rochester or?
Mm-hmm. There's also a church in Pine Island in Eota. Okay? So that's right. Those would, instances of shelters would not meet the regular definition, so that's how I capture those families. And then adequate. Adequate is a big part of McKinney-Vento as well. Adequate places to live in Minnesota are places that have heat, have running water, have electricity, are not full of infestations, that sort of thing. A child has a place to sleep, has access to running water, that sort of thing. So currently I'm working with a family who is in a trailer. There's about 12 people in the trailer. The kitchen sink has collapsed through the floor, no running water. That is not an adequate place for a family to live. And they're doubled up and sharing that place. So that would be an example of lacks adequacy. It's not a dignified or adequate place to live. So what does homelessness look like in Rochester? I was hired in around 2010-11, and that's partially because the person who was doing the job, Wendy Moritz, who's now the principal at Falwell, knew that it was too big for one person to just have as a small part of their job. And so I started part-time in 2011, and as soon as we started doing some outreach and interaction with the social workers in the community and in the schools, our numbers just really exploded. And this truly, I think, those first bumps were because the job truly we weren't doing any outreach, we weren't meeting the obligations, and the job just really grew and grew. Last year, we identified 535 students experiencing homelessness. My numbers are cumulative, so I will say that. So if a student is identified in September, but they leave us in December, they're still part of my list. So I count the number I don't double count kids, but it's a cumulative total. Is that making sense? So I might have 350 kids who are active, but I've identified 535 kids through the course of the year.
Which is a really good way to count because we're counting them all then.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it may get resolved, we're not saying, oh, you have to be homeless for this period of time or that period, and which is what happens a lot in the homeless world is you have to meet all these sort of criteria all the time. And so I think it's really wonderful, and it's a good way to get a better, if we had 535 kids counted last year in the Rochester Public Schools and across all of southeast Minnesota, on this day we only counted 483, you can see there's an undercount that's going on.
And another kind of reason I think for that jump that I saw in 15-16 is honestly we went to all-day kindergarten, and our numbers in Rochester as a district grew by 1,000. In transition kids or homeless students average about 3 to 4% of the population nationally. That's a pretty solid estimate, and that's about where we are. Some schools have as high as 8%. Some schools have as low as 2%, but we have homeless students across the district. University of Minnesota study, the amazing Dr. Ann Masden, followed homeless students in Minneapolis for 6 years. And she looked at many different risk factors, and of the risk factors that students face, homelessness may be one of the worst. And I'll show you a couple slides. You don't have to, it's a little bit hard to see here. But this top green line is all students' math results from 2009 to 2014. So this is 70% are in the proficiency range for 5th grade math across the state. This next line is free and reduced price lunch students, math proficiency across the state for these 5 years. So these are the students who are living in poverty, truly are kind of meeting that poverty definition. This blue line right here are all students across the state who have experienced homelessness. So homelessness has a profound impact on student academics. If a student changes schools, one time they lose an average of 4 months of curriculum. So if a student's changing schools one time and then 2 times, after about a couple moves, they're a year behind, and you can see how it quickly adds up. In terms of statewide reading results, if we look at this column here, these are the number. 20% of all students exceed reading results in Minnesota, 40% meet, 18% partially meet, 20%, 21.1% do not meet, or does not meet the requirements. So this is non-homeless students, this is homeless students. 4% exceeds, 4.7% exceeds, 20.6% meet requirements, statewide requirements for reading, 20 partially meet, 54 do not meet, does not meet requirements. Profound impact. Homelessness has a profound impact on academics.
And because I always also like to sort of bring it to the adults, I think as people get older, we forget that they were ever children. So in our adult population now that is homeless, they once were those kids of which you see 75% not meeting or partially meeting. And so the expectation that we have that, oh, they should just go out and get a job. They should just go do this. They should just go do that. Well, they didn't make it through school. Most of them, their reading they have issues with reading, they have issues with math, they have issues with social skills, they have issues with fitting into kind of the regular world, and that the link to what happens as a child has a tremendous impact as an adult. And if you look, we didn't stick this slide in, but there's a very, very high number. What we see in our family housing is that 32 to 42% of adults in the building actually graduated from high school. So they're not very well prepared. And I sometimes can be kind of a smarty pants when people say to me, well, they should just get jobs, and I would like them to come and say, you hire them. Because many of them would go out and get a job, but nobody will hire them. And so this idea or this myth that they're lazy and they don't want to and that they're just sucking off the system is just not true. They are not well prepared. The systems as they were when they were children, the systems meaning their parents, meaning the schools, meaning all of what they needed to do, they failed them. And now they're adults and they're not well prepared to succeed in our regular workaday world.
So what do we as a school district do to help? The list that you see here is really part of the federal requirements that we're meeting. Immediate enrollment. So when a student comes into our window and says, I need to register for school, I'm experiencing homelessness, we really try to get that student in school within 24 hours, 48 hours max. Rochester does a great job of that. In the cities, a student may look at something like a week or two before they can start, which is way too long. We want kids to get started right away. It's a safe place. They have access to meals. They have access to a social worker. We can get them connected in the community. So we really work to get students enrolled right away. Transportation to enrollment and registration appointments. So if someone calls me from the shelter and says, I need to enroll my students, but I can't get down there, we'll come to you or we'll give you a ride to us. So we do whatever we can to get kiddos to us and enrolled immediately. Transportation to a child's school of origin. So this is a great piece of the law that works to not interrupt a child's academics. So if a student, say for example, starts school in Bamber Valley, they end up in a hotel, let's say Motel 6, which would not be an uncommon place for a family to land here in Rochester. Motel 6, which is up in Sunset Terrace. We're going to try and keep that student, we're going to do everything we can to keep that student in Bamber Valley. So we're going to transport that student from Motel 6 to Bamber Valley to make sure that that child can finish the school year in the school that they started. We don't want to lose that 4 to 6 months of curriculum. So it's a really important piece of the law. Assistance with school supplies. Most of this, United Way is very generous, so we get some of our stuff from United Way and they give to the schools, and the schools really have a good job having this piece covered, but I will help if anyone asks and need help with school supplies. Scholarships for school activities. Here again, I'm very good at saying, please waive that fee, and people generally go, okay. So I don't have to spend a lot on scholarships because generally organizations will waive fees if I ask. Referrals to community resources. So as much as possible, I will make connections to public health, to the local shelters, to the United Way, to Salvation Army, to whatever a family might be needing, Channel 1, that sort of thing. And free breakfast and lunch at school. Also access to a school social worker. Any questions about those right away? That's my show. Our show. Do you have any to add to the last little bit there?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. Okay, questions? Yes, ma'am.
Maybe I missed it, but I didn't see the word mental health anywhere. And to me, that is such a big piece of it.
And actually, it's new in the reauthorization. Mental health is specifically mentioned as liaisons have to make referrals for mental health assistance. Yeah.
So in the homeless population in the adult world, probably 70 to 75% of the folks that are homeless are struggling with mental health issues. Probably 50% are struggling with what's called co-occurring, where they have both a mental health issue and a chemical health issue, either alcoholism or drug use. Some of that, I think maybe you've heard the word self-medicating, but some folks have such significant mental health issues. We also, I can't remember when, but it was really, really hard when it happened, but we closed all of our state hospitals because we said that we are going to give people the right to choose to live somewhere other than an institution. And I'm a little biased, but unfortunately, the choice that was left for those folks was the streets. So we have a lot of people who have very, very serious mental health issues who have an option to live on the streets because their mental health issues come with behaviors. And behaviors often get you kicked out of apartments and other places, especially if you have sort of an episode of some sort. And so mental health is a really, really big piece of it, and we're seeing it, the impact of being homeless not only for a child having an impact on their ability to learn, it also has just a tremendous impact on the body in terms of your cortisol levels, the chaos and trauma, and there's all this research now on what trauma does to a body and to a person. And so homelessness as just in itself is a traumatic event. And so we have a very large number of people who are trying to climb out of this trauma experience that comes with a lot of things that are happening biologically inside the body that they can't control, that just come with it. And for kids, for example, if your mom, if your dad or your mom's boyfriend or someone in your mother's life, there's an episode of domestic violence, what happens to a child, their brain and all the enzymes and whatever, I'm not a doctor, but they go into trauma, and it's a 2 or 3 week period before the chemicals in the brain settle down to a point where actually you can learn, where you can actually input into your body. And so when you live in a household where there's violence and chaos and all sorts of intense things happening, your levels are perpetually high, and your ability to input is really, really affected. So mental health is a really, really, really big piece.
So what's our role?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I had created a slide and then I panicked and I took it back out.
You're probably already
Yeah.
before they wouldn't be here.
Yes. So what I generally say to that question is you have to find what you can do. So if your if what you feel like you're driven or called to do, for lack, for that term, whether it's volunteering at one of the local shelters, serving meals at Dorothy Day, serving meals at the Salvation Army Nude Lunch, doing an overnight with Family Promise, interacting with families so that there's a true understanding. That's one thing that I think can make a big impact, and I think it carries over in a way that people don't expect. Like I said, that Sunday morning pack up is a very, very humbling experience. So that's one thing. Certainly, volunteering at your local school. If you get in and meet kids, elementary kids love to talk, and they'll tell you a lot of interesting stuff. So that's one way you can, read to kids, interact with kids. I'm always going to come from the child perspective. So, in terms of the adult world, Nancy will probably have different suggestions, but those are some that I will say. Absolutely. Yep. I can give out my telephone number. Welcome to call me. Do you want it now? I can give it. I'll write it down. Well, Nancy, anything?
And I would just, sort of add a few things. I think that, and I don't even exactly know how to talk about this because I don't exactly have the answer, but I just think about what we as a country have done for seniors, and when we see that number drop. And so, there's a tipping point, I think, where we need to not continue to age children up into homelessness, because if they aren't in the workaday world, then we do end up as a community having to support them. And that somehow it seems like we need to find some synergy around changing some of our policies and our practices so that we can really have community change where we are not growing those numbers of homeless folks. Because in our country, since I've been doing this work since 1988, the numbers have grown and grown and grown and grown, and some of that is a result of the policies and the laws that have been passed and how they impact people.
So along that vein, what's done like for these people that live in these housing with the families to help the parents like to get a GED, to get the mental health care that they need, the physical care that they need? What's done to?
I think it's different in every program. And I can talk a little bit about Center City, but we offer a lot of opportunity. With our family programming, we really have shifted much of what we do to be focusing on the children, because we're really looking to interrupt that generational homelessness. And so we have an early childhood program where we are attending to those developmental delays. If you can catch them early, they don't necessarily stick, and kids have a shot at going to kindergarten ready, and then at a shot at that carrying on if we can keep them from another episode of homelessness. With the parents, we do, we will be bringing in, we have job training programs, we connect people to, we do parenting classes, we will connect with the school. An example in Duluth, so Gage East is just opening, we're just getting ready, so we're designing the programming and getting it going, but we have a program in Duluth where in our TOTS program where we realized there was a lot of kids that parents weren't reading to their kids, and so we hooked up with the school district, and their adult learning came in, and they designed a program that was around reading to your children, and then they brought in other elements to help folks start to study and get ready for the GED and that kind of stuff. In our programming, we don't require that you do it. And part of the reason why we don't do that, it's a little bit counterintuitive, I think, for folks, because you think, oh, we got to make these people do this. But these are the folks who have been told or else 100,000 million times. And so that doesn't work. They say, fine, I'll go be homeless again. And so we don't require it. And what tends to happen is if you give people an opportunity and the time that they personally need to take to come to a decision to do something different, they often take that. And it happens at different times in different places for different folks. And so we really see tremendous success at people making really meaningful life changes around education and around their mental health and around jobs. One of the things the Wilder study did in Minnesota was a return on investment, where they looked at all the permanent supportive housing programs, where you get affordable housing and you get a set of support services. So that's what Gage East is. And in Minnesota, they looked at youth housing for those 18 to 24-year-olds. If you spent $1, you spend $1 on a permanent supportive housing program, and you gain $7 back. For families, You spend $1, you gain $1.45, and the numbers were not as big as youth because they didn't look at any costs associated with the children, which would be quite dramatic, and they didn't look at any costs associated with health. So where did the money get saved? It got saved, first of all, people got jobs, and so they started to pay taxes. So the state coffers got to see more money. And people, chemical health, people didn't go to treatment as often because they didn't need that service, and incarceration. So very costly systems. Incarceration and treatment both went down significantly, so there were huge cost savings. Another huge cost saving to the community with permanent supportive housing is out-of-home placement for children. It's very, very expensive for counties to put kids into foster care, and it's really, really hard to find foster care homes to place children in. Permanent supportive housing significantly reduces that need because the support is there for the family, and so the children are in less danger.
What happens to the parents when the kids all turn 18 and they're gone and the parents get kicked out? That's what I'm thinking of. They do something so that they can be okay when that happens.
So part of what we will do, so permanent supportive housing is kind of a new thing in the United States. We used to do what was called emergency shelter, which we still have some of, and transitional, which meant you could stay for 2 years. And what happened is people stayed for 2 years and then they would have to leave, and for some of these folks they needed longer than 2 years. So we've been doing permanent supportive housing now for about since 2010, so almost 7 years. And we have had some families that have been living with us since they came in, and their children, we had 7. When in 2010 we had 7 babies born. So they're now 7, 6.5, 7. So as we move closer and closer to those folks not having children, we'll be getting to work with those folks to look at what options do they want, where do they want to go. Because it'll be cheaper for them to move into a smaller apartment than if they're in a 3-bedroom apartment.
But they don't qualify to stay in that family and youth housing anymore, right? They don't-
Well, the difficult thing is that we have fair housing laws, and we can't just kick somebody out because they don't have children, because children are a protected class. So we will be, you can't just say, oh, you don't have children, you have to go. But naturally, it's not going to make sense for you to stay. So people are going to, they're going to be older. They're not going to want to, we got kind of an older crowd. You don't really want to be around all the 5-year-olds anymore. Your kids are grown. So our goal will be to be working with folks to help them make some choices on where they want to go next and help them to move into that.
So what conditions, if any, are there that you have a right to kick them out? Do you ever kick someone out?
We do. People do sometimes exit our program, and we don't really like to call it kicking them out, but sometimes I think they might feel like that's what's happening. So non-payment of rent. So we know we're looking to house people who have had difficulty maintaining their own housing, and one of the things they struggle with is paying their rent on time. So we build into our budget an understanding that we're going to have some of that going on. But if it is consistent and chronic, and we have tried everything and you won't ever do your part of it, you will be asked to leave. Violence, serious violence, any violence, really serious violence, any assaults, you will be asked to leave. You will have to move on. Serious drug dealing, those kinds of things. Our goal is really, we are looking at the safety of the community and the safety of everybody else who lives there. So if there's significant drug dealing going on in your apartment and you are completely unwilling to stop doing that, we're going to help you move along. So there are people that do leave, but it's minimal, because what happens, like in Rochester, I think this won't be a surprise to anybody, and come back next week and you'll learn more about it, but there is virtually little or no affordable housing in this community. And if you also happen to be a person of color, and you don't make very much money, you have an even harder time finding a place to live. And so what we tend to find is this is like a really amazing thing for you. It's affordable. The services and the programs that are there for your children, you start to see change, and you start to see, so people really want to stay and do and be, and we see tremendous change in people's lives and the choices that they make. So it's rare, but some people do get kicked out.
Exiting the program.
Exiting the program. But it's not very many, because we really try hard.
What is the ethnic composition of the homeless?
Oh, that's a great question.
I don't have that. I don't know. I don't have that information. I'm sorry.
What I can
It
say,
would be available in the Wilder study if you looked on Wilder, just Googled Wilder, Minnesota, and I'm sure it would come right up, but I don't have that.
so anecdotally or not so anecdotally, what I can say in Duluth, Minnesota is that 70 to 80% of the folks that live in our buildings are people of color, whether that be African American, Native American, Hispanic. That the people of color in Minnesota are very, very overrepresented in the homeless population. And in a lot of studies that have done out there about indicators of success, Minnesota is one of the least successful states at helping people of color be successful. So,
And in the student population, that number for me is closer to 60. So,
and very overrepresented. So if you think in Rochester, 60% of the students are in the homeless population, and what is it, 8% of the total population. So that overrepresentation is really, really big, and it's not just because people of color are doing things wrong. It's because there are systems that sometimes create barriers that make it impossible for them to have very many options. And that's something, back to what can we do? We can think about that a little bit, and how can we change some of those things in our community.
I have a question about the youth part of the housing. Is it 16 to 22?
To 21.
No, to 21. So these are single apartments, so one person lives in one
Yep.
apartment. And I just think, I don't know that there's a way around it, but you have all of these people living in individual apartments, and they all probably need role models in order to set up effective housekeeping and responsibly take care of an apartment and that sort of thing. So what do you do about that? I mean,
So it'll be a mix. I think one of the things that I learned really early in 1989 and 1990 when I really got in is that I had an idea that homeless people were kind of messy. I expect that the youth are going to be a little bit more messier than their older folks, but it would surprise people to see how many people really do take good care of their apartments. But I do expect that we'll have some youth who have had no experience of that and have lived in places that have been quite messy, and so they don't really get agitated to clean much. So we will be working our case managers. That will be part of, so everyone will have what we call a goal plan. For the children, we call them growth plans. And so housekeeping and keeping your apartment clean might be part of what's in your plan. And so that puts us in a spot to be able to help you move towards that. And so,
clean is the least of it, probably. I'm just thinking about responsible living in general and that sort of thing for kids who probably haven't had that problem for them. Who are
right.
living on their own. And I know they could be living on the street instead, so it's an upgrade no matter what, but I was just curious.
it's sometimes a mix. It's sometimes the teens that I work with are surprisingly resourceful and very
responsible.
Young men and women because they've been taking care of themselves since they were 13. So, and I, as a mother of a 15 and 16-year-old, I'm going to put my kids on a housekeeping plan. We'll see how that goes.
Well, one of the things we did is we when you come into the apartments, they all have hooks on them. There's closets and stuff, but we create kind of this little sort of, now we call it the mud room, the entryway, and in there we have hooks and benches, because I don't know about your children, but my children did not learn how. They just could not seem to possibly hang anything on a hanger that resembled a jacket, and so we thought these kids might be similar, so some of the ideas to provide, we try to create opportunities for people to be able to at least hang stuff on a hook is a little bit easier sometimes, especially with the kids, than hangers. So it'll be really individual to your question. One of the things about Center City is that we really recognize that for every single person in this room, how I would interact with you, deal with you, if we were to sit down and talk about what you wanted to do next in your life, whether that would be in the next week or two, that every single person in here would have a different idea and a different plan. And so we recognize that with our homeless families and youth as they move in. And so what we do with them and what they want to do and where their issues and their barriers and their struggles are, it will be very unique to each household. And we will do our best to respond to that.
Are your housing units decorated now, or did you get what you needed from the Target?
We got probably 90% of what we needed. If anybody wanted to go to Target, the Target gift registry. Either you still have the opportunity to do that. Gage is the first name, East is the last name. What we need now are single bed comforters, pots and pans, and dishes. Those are kind of the top 3 things, and we don't need a lot of them. But because we probably got, Sheila is my workmate here helping me, we probably got about 90%. Yes, it's amazing. The Rochester community has been amazing at how much they have given and supported us. And then last Saturday, we did have a volunteer event where we worked with families from Gloria Day, and Century High School honor students came, and we had, I don't know, 35 to 50, it's hard to say, volunteers who came and set up all the apartments. So they made beds, and they pulled the pots and pans and put them in the cupboards, and we have mops and dustpans and brooms, and we put a roll of toilet paper on the roll. We had to hang all of the shower curtains. I mean, just think about moving in and then times that by 55. So it was a great day. It was a really exhausting day, but most of them are done.
But they're not decorated.
But they're not decorated.
They're not
'cause,
decorated.
People.
Yeah.
People
They're
will want to,
beautiful,
and
they're
there's
lovely, but they're
and there's things missing.
Yeah.
So,
no
but
pictures. Yeah.
and people will, they'll put up what they want, and they'll bring us stuff and that. Well, we are kind of opening right now. We've had 2 families move in on Monday, and right now we're scheduled to have 2 families move in tomorrow and 2 families move in on Thursday. And we're kind of doing it a little bit slow because, again, those cortisol levels and all that trauma, we're wanting to give the families a little bit of time to sort of get a little balance and find the bathroom and all that kind of stuff. And then we have folks that are for the next week, and there'll be 2 kids on the youth side. The youth are, don't know if it'll surprise anybody, but they're slippery. We keep losing them.
The community's capacities or inadequacies across the spectrum of needs, because, we've got the brief idea. You work out of the public schools. That's one institutional approach here at the Center City. That's a brand new thing, and created a new answer along with our old traditional and Dorothy Day and IHM, all that. So where are the holes, and or which ones need the chance to be more robust?
Emergency housing for youth, host homes. Started that program through Link. It got put on pause for kind of bureaucratic reasons through Link, and but we're looking at trying to find a different way. So emergency places to stay for youth is still a huge hole in Rochester. Permanent supportive housing is great, but there's a process. It takes a got to do an application.
Took us 5 years.
Yeah,
to get
to this point. So that's still what I see a big hole. And Gage East is an amazing project, and I feel proud to be a part of it. And it's going to support 30 families, but there were 150 applications for those 30 units. And the average 2-bedroom apartment in Rochester is $983. And if you're working a $10 an hour job and you can't get full time because then somebody has to pay benefits and you're trying to pay child care, can't afford that apartment. Yeah.
What is the market value? I know they're going to pay a percent of their salary, but what is the market value of the apartment?
Oh, that's a good question.
So what are the rents?
What is the market? You said they're going to
So
pay
the-
10%, so what is the market value?
So the rents are all set at the fair market rent number, which is defined by the federal government, and I'm not going to remember, but the 2 bedrooms I think are probably near the 983, and the 3 bedrooms are like 1,041. And so how it will work is Melissa and her family will move in, and Melissa is on, MFIP,
So I'm working 30 hours a week, but can't quite.
Right. Well, you're on state assistance.
Yeah.
If you have 2 children, you get $527 a month. So then Yes, and just so you know that the MFIP, which used to be AFDC, which we used to call welfare, started in the 70s by Richard Nixon. And at that point, if you were a family with one child, you got $437 in Minnesota. If you had 2 children, you got $527, and if you have 3 children, you got $621. In 2016, if you have 1 child, you get $437. If you have 2 children, you get $527. And if you have 3 children, you get $621. There has never been a raise. Never, ever, ever been a raise. You can't survive on it. But people try to do it. And so we will have families who will be on MFIP. And so if you have 2 children, you'll have $527 a month. You will pay a third of that towards your rent, and then we have Section 8 certificates, so the HRA will pay the difference up to the rent cost, whether that is a 2 or a 3 bedroom. So that's how we are able to, because we can't just give it away, because the electricity and the utilities and the mowing of the lawn and the insurance for the building, I mean, those costs are the same for our building as they are. And we don't get a deal because it's for homeless folks. And so we have to charge the fair market rent, but then part of my work was to go around and find ways to subsidize the units so that the families could afford them and we could meet our budgetary responsibilities.